The Gulf Stream by Caroline, Sebastian, Christian and Eva. What is the Gulf Stream? The Gulf Stream is a huge ocean current in the Atlantic. The Gulf Stream drives warm surface water from the Gulf of Mexico to the North Atlantic, where it splits into different branches, releasing heat. The water becomes colder and saltier as it moves up, becoming more dense and eventually sinking and flowing back to the equator. How does it work? The warm surface water by the Gulf of Mexico is heated up by the sun, resulting in evaporation and an increase in the salt content. The warm salty water is transported north by trade winds and eventually cools down in the North Atlantic. As ice freezes, its salt is pushed out of the ice, so the surrounding water increases in salinity. This makes its density rise and the water sink, creating a vacuum. When it hits the bottom, it moves back to the equator, where it's heated, therefore rising to the top, and the cycle continues. This was a recreation of that theory. The other big factor of the Gulf Stream is salt content in water. The salt content affects the water's density. We did an experiment testing if salt water is denser than fresh water on top of colored salt water. The salt water stayed at the bottom, showing that it is more dense than fresh water. This is a graph from our quantitative salinity experiment. It shows that the data creates a linear graph that adding more salt increased the density by the same amount of each time. The Gulf Stream moves 30 to 150 million cubic meter water per second. It moves at 9 kilometers per hour. It is approximately 10,000 kilometers long. It was discovered by Juan Ponce de Leon in 1513 in his search for the fountain of youth. The Gulf Stream has a big influence on our lives. It determines our weather and our climate. It raises the temperature in Europe about 5 to 10 degrees Celsius and causes milder winters in Europe. Poof! Without the Gulf Stream, the temperature in Europe would be significantly colder. We would have longer winters and most countries would be ice-covered. But this might happen. Due to climate change and the greenhouse effect, if the polar caps were to actually melt away, the salt content in the water would drop immensely, decreasing the water's density and slowing the sinking process. This would result in the slowing of the Gulf Stream, and eventually the Gulf Stream would stop.